Hi, you're watching.
Ever since Arhan was a child, there was a story that his father often spoke about. Standing before a massive portrait of their ancestor, Liam Caravan, a man with a huge build, silver hair, and a rough beard, holding an enormous sword in his hand. He told Arhan that it was essential to remember this story as a member of the House Caravan. He ruffled through Arhan's hair gently, then looked up at the family's heirloom, a majestic sword displayed on the wall, before starting the story. Even though the Caravans lived in a territory far from the capital now, 200 years ago, the family's prestige was beyond anyone's reach. Everyone spoke of House Caravan's name with high reverence. A family chosen by the sword, producing swordmasters generation after generation. Their knights were called the god of war, and the righteous guardians, admired by all and favored by the kings. Hence the name Caravan, the invincible protectors. Arhan's father knelt down and told him to always live with pride in the steel blood flowing through his veins, as he would succeed as head of the House Caravan. He asked Arhan to reclaim the Caravan's glorious name and once again stand proudly as the protector of this land. This was the mission of the House Caravan. Despite hearing this story from his father, Arhan thought the heroic tales of his family were probably just tall tales. Fallen nobles embellishing their past glory to live by is quite common, after all. Harvesting crops in the vast paddy field. Arhan thought he wouldn't be ruling over a mere village like this, and farming alongside the villagers if the caravan story were true. Besides, he thought there were too many plot holes in his father's story. The family's founder and the person in the portrait shared no resemblance whatsoever to either of his father or him. Liam Caravan. Their ancestor was an old man with silver hair, and he was of a big build, wherein Arhan and his father were both slim and had blonde hair. The sword preserved as a family heirloom was far too sharp and pristine for something supposedly made hundreds of years ago. And most importantly, none of the kingdom's history books mentioned the name of his ancestor, Liam Caravan. Considering all of these plot holes, Arhan came to the conclusion that the story was only made up to give future generations something to take pride in. On a bright day, in the middle of a paddy field, Arhan was spacing out, thinking about his family's tall tales. The villagers working alongside asked him to take a snack break. An elderly villager rushed him to hurry before the warmest bread was gone. He joked about emptying the bread if Arhan delayed any longer. Hearing that Arhan rushed to eat the bread, working alongside the villagers and farming with them brought great joy to Arhan. He thought even though the caravan wasn't a great family, everyone who welcomed him was with him right there. He loved this place, where he could live alongside them. That was the caravan Arhan wanted. But if only things could have stayed like this forever, his peace wouldn't have been spoiled. After hours of farming alongside the villagers, Arhan informed them that they had achieved today's quota and he was heading out to the market in the next village. He also informed them that he would pick up what everyone needed in the market. Arhan remembered that the villager named Kun wanted apples for a long time, as he had been complaining for ages about not seeing any fruit. He also reminded that he would pick up a pretty doll if it was available as a present for Marino's youngest daughter, as her birthday was coming up soon. The villagers were both delighted and astonished when they found out that their young master was informed about their needs. Marino felt thankful to the young master and questioned him about how he knew about her youngest daughter's birthday. Arhan casually dismissed her by saying he would know at least that much, given he was going to be the next lord after all. He bid them goodbye and rode his horse to the market in the next village. The villagers greeted him back and asked him to take care of himself. Then Arhan happily left for the next village. After Arhan left for the market, the villagers were happily chatting about the kindness of their young master. Kun was bragging that there was no one on par with their young master, and others agreed to the same. They discussed how Arhan was different from other nobles, and wondered which noblewoman would snatch him up. After the merry talks, Kun urged everyone to finish up the rest of their work before it got late. He also reminded everyone that today was their regular meeting with the Lord. Before he could finish speaking, a sword cut through the side of his face. The old lady inquired what day he was talking about. Hearing no response from him, the old lady turned back only to find him dead on the road. Frightened by the sight, the villagers shrieked in fear. The old lady's face was cut in half when a sword sliced through her. Within seconds, the warm, glowing sun turned dark, painting the entire sky red. The grass field was covered with blood. There was an unfamiliar, mysterious man carrying an enormous sword standing high amongst them. He had long silver hair and was clad in a knight's uniform. The living villagers faced the mysterious man with fear. An older hooded man, despite his fear, confronts the mysterious man with a shrieking voice, asking who he was. Yet the mysterious man replied coldly that this territory must be erased. Upon hearing it, the villagers stepped back in fright. The mysterious man cast a sharp red thread energy line on every one of the villagers, making them freeze in fear. The mysterious man strangled the villager by squeezing the red energy line. The villagers cried out in pain, being unable to free themselves from his power. Fleeing didn't help either, as the power line restricted them. The red lines of power flashed brightly like lightning, exploding midair. The mysterious man skillfully assassinated every one of the villagers and set fire to the entire village. Later in the night, when Arahan returned from the market, all he could see was mutilated bodies of the villagers. His body froze in disbelief, and he let go of the apples and the doll he was holding. When he was questioning why everyone was dead, an unfamiliar figure appeared behind him and covered his eyes. To his relief, it was none other than his butler, who pleaded not look at the scene before him. Asrahan asked his butler if he was seeing things, but the butler confirmed his suspicion. He informed Asrahan that a mysterious man had come, saying that the caravan must be erased. He also added that it only took 10 minutes for the man who appeared without any sign or warning, swung his blade with cold indifference, and extinguished half the lives in the territory. All it took was only one single swordmaster to eradicate half of the caravans. Asrahan grieved with sorrow, crying in disbelief over the loss of his beloved people. It was a disaster in the form of a single man. Asrahan and his butler returned to their manor only to find all of his people were dead. The corpse's head rolled around, making it harder to breathe. Asrahan cried out loud, grieving their death. Amidst the horrific disaster that struck without any warning, he found a single point of hope when his mother called his name out. His mother cried out in relief after finding out his son was alive. He hugged his mother and, for a moment, his mother's embrace brought him relief. Only later did he realize that the tragedy had just begun. The Swordmaster who erased half of the caravan's territory in an instant didn't harm Asrahan's parents. Instead, he left by saying he would return in 1 month. He also warned his parents to take everyone from this place and leave by then if they wished to live. Asrahan was agitated about why he was doing this to them when they had never committed any crime. The manor and the estate were completely destroyed. The fire had ruined their land. The surviving villagers, one by one, began leaving the village, leaving behind those inexplicable words. They took their remaining things and horses, leaving their place, which they once called home. It was the only way to save their lives. However, Asrahan's family weren't granted that choice. Asrahan's father was a great knight who slayed the evil dragon. He swore to the heavens absolutely that he would never abandon his duty to sever the head of great evil. Asrahan's mother told him that the butler prepared the carriage. She asked him to leave the territory with the butler and go as far as he could go. He couldn't reason with his mother, as we wanted to convince both his parents to leave with him. However, his mother told the lords cannot leave their place, and had to face the enemy as the Lord of Caravan until the very last moment. She further added that as his companion, she would stay with him until that moment. Asrahan didn't want his mother to stay, and begged her to leave with him. Despite his desperate cries, his mother asked him to listen carefully to what she had to say. She confirmed that the stories the Lord told him weren't true, and all those things about righteous guardians and invincible protectors were just a history filled with lies. Asrahan was flabbergasted and struggled to find his words. She asked him to make a promise to never touch a sword again for the rest of his life, and to do whatever it took to survive. She caressed his face gently and wiped his tears. She asked him not think about revenge and just live for himself. When the butler informed her that the carriage was ready, she requested him to take good care of Asrahan. She urged him to get as far away as possible before the Swordmaster arrived, to which the butler obliged and took Asrahan with him. Asrahan pleaded with her to stay with him. She told him that she loved him, and returned to the manor. Asrahan's mother found his father in the manor's library, with the books scattered on the floor. His father hit his head on the wall numerous times, causing him to bleed. Unable to see him hurting, she hugged him and pleaded with him to stop suffering alone. She told him that until his last moment, she would be with him. Later that night, traveling through the dense forest in a carriage, the butler asked Asrahan to endure it, even though it was devastating and heartbreaking. That mysterious swordmaster was a complete disaster. He was a natural calamity that humans like us could do nothing about. He asked Asrahan to accept that day's tragedy as such, and forget about it. And only then would he be able to live on? He further added that both the lord and the lady would want the same. Hearing no response from Asrahan, the butler looked behind only to find him running back to the manor. Asrahan didn't want to leave his parents behind and run away alone. He believed that the Swordmaster might have a fancy title like God or whatsoever, but in the end, he was still a human. A human just like us who will die if an arrow pierces through his heart. For the past month, Asrahan spent his time obtaining deadly poison. He was sure that if he could just land his shot, he could protect them both. Upon his rushed arrival at the manor, he found a purple flag with a wolf emblem hoisted in the manor. He was mortified when he found his father's head hung alongside the flag on the rod. Blood dripped slowly, tracing down the steel rod. After noticing him, the Swordmaster called him foolish, as he returned only to find his death. He told him he showed mercy, and before he could finish his sentence, Asrahan found his mother dead, lying on the cold ground with blood dripping from her mouth, and wailed her death. He plunged forward towards the Swordmaster and aimed his crossbow at him. Before he could pull the trigger, the Swordmaster cast a spell on him. Asrahan was choking himself in the end. The Swordmaster informed him that he should consider it a good fortune, as he had not turned 18 yet. He further told him that he would not take his life right then, and he should drown in that despair and die. He told Asrahan that not a single trace of the caravan's will to be remained on this continent, and also warned him not to try to continue his bloodline, and if he did so, he would find him again. He asked the caravans to disappear. Asrahan found himself pathetic, being unable to protect his people. That was the day he lost everything. He lost his parents, his house, his people, and his land. Or that's what he thought. It's been a year since Asrahan buried everyone in one place on the territory. During those times, he was prepared for revenge. The mysterious Swordmaster who took everything from me was Carlos, the master of the 10 swords. He was considered to be the strongest blade on the continent. He was a protector who safeguarded the kingdom's peace, and a righteous guardian who destroyed evil. He was a transcendent being with the most brilliant talent amongst all swordmasters. Everything was a mystery as to why he killed Asrahan's family and who was scheming it. He didn't know if the caravans held any secret. But he was certain of one thing, that all the lives of caravans he took would never return. When he wandered through the manor, he came across the portrait of his ancestor, Liam Caravan. He thought he was going mad from his desire for revenge when he saw a radiant light glowing from the portrait. He was shocked when he found the sword from the portrait floating before him. The sword was glowing with a blue hue forming around it. He couldn't think as something unbelievable appeared before him. To his surprise, the man in the portrait spoke up. He asked Asrahan to show some respect as his descendant. The sword wasn't the only thing which was glowing. Asrahan's ancestor looked majestic with massive power radiating from him. Asrahan thought the story was all tall tales and was made up of lies. However, he couldn't ignore what he was seeing in the form of the legendary ancestor from the portrait. Asrahan was debating with himself whether what he saw was true or not. He had heard of people who suffered severe psychological trauma for various reasons, and sometimes saw visions. But he wasn't convinced enough, as the being before him was far too vivid to dismiss it as such. That's when the man spoke up as if he could see through him. He said he could sense the turmoil in Asrahan's heart and questioned if he had thought that he had lost his mind. He further questioned if he was shocked beyond measure that the ancestor he had dismissed as delusional had appeared before him. Asrahan was scared, yet he asked if the situation was indeed real and not just an illusion. He couldn't wrap his mind around the whole situation. Still, he questioned if he was truly the Liam Caravan, the founder of their family and the strongest swordmaster in history. Asrahan was angered over why he had appeared now, of all times. Liam assured he was indeed the one from those heroic tales, and had been watching him every day for the past year to confirm if he was ready to take his revenge. He told him that revenge was a grueling path that one shouldn't even get started on unless they are prepared to abandon everything. Liam was astonished by Asrahan's obsession with never letting go of the sword for even a single day, and despite having a talent, he had an unwavering will. Liam said that he appeared now of all times because of the hatred in his eyes, which had reached his desired depth, and as his patience had reached its limit. He fiercely stated that his bloodlust was to tear apart the ones who had mercilessly slaughtered his descendants and the people of his territory. He also added that, in the history of that continent, there was an untold truth wherein a swordmaster can be killed only by another swordmaster. Liam understood that Asrahan knew the truth, which was why he foolishly swung his sword and vowed revenge. However, he was told that even if he had trained his entire life, he could not reach Carlos's level. A swordmaster is a transcendent being beyond the category of human. It is a supreme realm even those called geniuses couldn't fathom. Amongst those swordmasters, Carlos stands at an unattainable high place as a transcendent. Even in Liam's era of war, only a few had such skills. No one in the current generation could kill Carlos. Even when the time passes, he will become even greater. Asura clearly knew the gap between them was vast, but he was hopeless when he found out it was beyond difficult and impossible to do so. His rage took over him, and his eyes were bloodshot when he realized he could just watch as the bastard who took everything from him would become a hero. Liam questioned if Asura felt helpless again, but he ensured the situation would change as he was going to help him become a blade sharper and stronger than Carlos, so that he could judge that murderer as a true caravan. Liam informed that there was only one method, the sole path that only caravans can walk, and that was by devouring his sword. Only Liam's descendant, who inherited the steel blood, could devour his sword. Asura was shocked, yet he composed himself. Liam said that the caravan bloodline was mixed with human and dwarf blood, which originated from him, as he was a dwarf half-breed. He further added that the physical traits of dwarves don't show through the blood. A special ability had been passed on to descendants, and that ability was to consume blades, or more precisely, swords. It helps in making the memories and techniques of its wielder on its own. That was the source of power that allowed caravans to produce swordmasters generation after generation and stand tall as a great family. Arsahan could not believe the entire story, and he found everything absurd. Honestly, those stories only confused him even more. However, he had no choices left, and no time to hesitate. So he calmed his nerves down and asked his ancestor how to consume the sword. Liam grinned at Asurahan's choice and assisted him. He said that the consumption was quite simple. He asked Asurahan to heat the sword until its blade softened enough, then to chew and swallow it. Asurahan found it bizarre, and still lit a fire in a fireplace. He held his ancestor's sword in the fire until it softened. He knew he could have got trapped in a nightmare, gone mad, or been possessed by a mere phantom. Even if there's the slightest chance that any of those could work, he was desperate enough to do so. He took the blazing sword covered in fire to his mouth and started devouring it. The burning sword burnt his tongue and his hand and the entirety of him at the end. He could feel the burn and screamed out in pain when the fire enveloped him. He was floating in the air as if someone lifted him off the ground. He was choking himself when the fire died down and fell from a high place. He could have broken a limb or two, and he ended up coughing violently. When he considered giving up, he remembered his family, the villagers, and the injustice they had suffered. He vowed to himself that he would succeed even if it killed him. He shoved the length of the sword down his throat, burning him in the process. Despite the overwhelming pain, he wanted to become a swordmaster who could take Carlos down with him. It was a fine, chirpy morning when Asurahan opened his eyes. He couldn't believe that he was still alive. He let out a sigh of relief when he realized he sustained no single injury. He remembered the pain of chewing and swallowing the heated steel in his mouth. He wondered if he was still dreaming or if it had really happened. Fortunately, that wasn't the case, as he found only the remains of the sword's handle. He heard Liam complimenting his commendable mental strength, which was unlike his utterly weak body. Even amongst his ancestors, quite a few gave up, unable to endure the searing pain. Liam asked if Asurahan could believe his words. He also confirmed that every legend of the caravan that Asurahan's father told was true. He said he was not just one of his random hallucinations. Asurahan realized everything was true and greeted the founder. Liam asked Asurahan to call him master because all his students did the same. Asurahan couldn't believe what he was hearing. The one and only founder of the caravans was floating in the air with an immense aura surrounding him. He knew the founder told him the truth and proceeded to call him master. Asurahan inquired if he had inherited those great powers his father spoke of. Liam said that if he consumed his sword, it would grant him its powers. However, Asurahan did not find anything different. Liam said there seemed to be a problem, or rather, it was Asurahan's problem specifically. Asurahan could not understand what he meant and asked what his problem was. Originally, Liam's plan was to feed his beloved sword to Asurahan and elevate him to the realm of a swordmaster. However, Liam's blood had thinned over generations. While his ability to consume swords remained, the ability to digest the power within them had seemed to have greatly weakened. To simplify, in Asrahan's current state, it was impossible to fully digest the essence of the sword. Asrahan felt devastated that all his efforts were in vain. He dropped down on his knees to grasp his situation. He half-heartedly said that if that's what the master declares, then that must have been the case. Liam was agitated if that was all his reaction amounted to. Asrahan shouted that he was already aware of his body's inadequacy. While the results were disappointing, he was simply grateful to have another path. He steeled his heart and asked whether he needed to find a sword that matched his own capacity. Liam chuckled at his response. He was clearly amused by Asrahan's perception, which was already at the level of a swordmaster. Liam calmly replied that the more worn with use, the better the sword. He instructed Asrahan to guide him to a place with many old, worn weapons and told him he would select the sword. Asrahan took Liam to an abandoned wasteland in the middle of nowhere. There were no other living creatures in their surroundings. The place felt eerie and gave chills. Liam said the place had an ominous aura and added that the dark mages would have been pleased with it. Everything old from the slums was gathered here, from worthless scrap metals to unusable weapons. Asrahan bet that there would be no better place than this to find a sword that met his master's condition. Liam was glad that they had a good start. He also added that he used to devour swords in places that reeked of blood. Liam described the swords as gripped by the dead soldiers, axes covered in dirt and blood, spears with broken shafts, and how he ate it all with all his might again and again. Asrahan was surprised to hear the facet of Liam's story. Liam said that to grow stronger and to survive, he had to clash endlessly and devastate himself to protect the spark of life. He felt bitter as somehow this place reminded him of those times when some died while others survived. He was reminded of those battlefield struggles where countless lives inevitably vanished without a trace. Yet even so, someone left behind their single brilliant light. Liam spotted a single golden light glimmering in the middle of the wasteland. The light shone so brightly, guiding them to what they were looking for. Liam said that he had found the perfect weapon and instructed his young descendants to take hold of it. Liam said that would be Asrahan's second sword. After a month, Asrahan went back to his family's manor. He thought the place would have been abandoned, but to his surprise, he found a bunch of bandits inside the manor. Apparently, the bandits had heard that there were no family or villagers in the manor. Not sensing any people within their proximity, they went inside the manor and argued that the manor could have been used by a dark mage as an experimental and had been abandoned. Another argued that if it were true, they would have been dead the moment they stepped in. One of the bandits guessed it could have been a fallen noble's hideout place. The bandits were astonished by the size of the manor and said that they could smell those high and mighty nobles. They were amazed by the luxurious sight in front of them. One of the bandits told them they had lucked out and their job to rob was going to be easy. Another chimed in happily. Not finding a caretaker made their job easier. A bandit with his face covered found a whole bunch of fine women's clothes as fresh as they could have ever been, and figured out that a noble lady had lived there. Those bandits smelled that scent on the clothes, and implied that if they played things right, they could have some other fun as well. They were sharing their inappropriate thoughts, and were keen on finding out a portrait to jerk off to. Asrahan was at a heightened state of anger after discovering the bandits' perverted opinion on his mother. He shouted at them to stop, which alerted those bandits, halting them from bantering. Asrahan clenched his teeth and said that his mother liked her things clean, and she always hated mess. So he suggested that they put it down quietly and have a conversation. The bandits were wondering who he was, and one of them said that he was the son of the manor's master, while another said he was just another brat. Asrahan calmly informed that if they had been looking for food or a place to stay, he could accept them as neighbors. The bandits were infuriated, and found him as a kid babbling nonsense. One of the bandits angrily told those noble kids had no fear at all and that Asrahan should have just hidden quietly. He questioned why Asrahan crawled out and asked if he wanted to die that badly. The said bandit ran towards Asrahan and jumped high off the ground to land a blow on him. Asrahan's eyes turned golden, burning with flaming fire, slit the bandit with his sword on his stomach, making him spill blood. Asrahan made sure that his uninvited guests were not his guests at all. Asrahan couldn't believe he pulled off such precise digging between the ribs. He pierced the lung of the uninvited guest. He knew he had zero skills or experience with swords. Yet there was only one reason it could have been possible. The owner of the needle he consumed a month ago. Asrahan wondered how incredible she would have been if he could perform such outstanding skills. A month back, Liam and Asrahan went back to the manor. They went to a room filled with weapons and equipment to tune those weapons. Asrahan asked his master if he had to devour the second sword, which looked less like a sword and more like a needle. He further inquired whether it would break if he tried to cut something with it. Liam calmly answered that it was only natural for it to break, as it was not made to slash enemies or smash them to pieces in the first place. He further said that the weapon was made for only one purpose. The weapon was to be used in a life-or-death duel, to pierce the enemy's vital point, and their life. It was a sword made for thrusting. Asrahan thought that if it was used only for thrusting, wouldn't a sturdy and familiar spear be considered a better option? As if Liam could read his mind, he answered that his doubt wasn't entirely wrong. He was flabbergasted at his master's ability to see through him. However, with Asrahan's weak and frail body, nothing would have been more useful than the memories dwelling in that sword. Liam said that, for reference, the owner of the needle, before her death, had pierced the lives of over 200 enemies, with a woman's body even more delicate than Asrahan's. Liam firmly ordered Asrahan to show respect to the sword and devour it gratefully. The weight of the steel might be light, but what dwelled within was as life of immense weight and solemnity. Liam said to Asrahan that by inheriting that woman's memories, he would gain many things. Asrahan had seen a vision of a woman named Meli after devouring the sword. Meli had a huge scar running down her face from her head to her cheek on one side. She was strapped with band-aids to cover the open burns. When she woke up, she was admitted to an orphanage. She was barely 10 years old when many things had changed after she opened her eyes. The girl's last memory was of a burning mansion, and her parents had been reduced to ash in the flames, unrecognizable even in form. When she learned she had barely managed to save her own life, she murmured quietly that she wished she had died along with her parents. The caretakers found her pitiful but couldn't help her. Meli had lost everything in an instant. She came to live in a rundown orphanage, and on the day she learned the orphanage worshipped the goddess of fire and regarded fire as salvation, she was dragged down to rock bottom once again. She lost everything to fire and had to live in a place where they saw fire as salvation. When she looked into the mirror, all she found was her scarred face with no life, and that's when she realized that she still hadn't escaped the flames. Meli's day in the orphanage was peacefully horrific. When she had to gather together for prayer in the orphanage's prayer room, she could hear others' whispers. People often discussed why her face was scarred. Few said that she had been cursed by the goddess, and that's why she had the mark of the curse in her face, and found it disgusting. They called her a monster and said she gave them chills, and she looked horrible and disgusting. Their whispers were not quiet. Meli heard them. She felt horrible hearing their comments. She was devastated and wanted to die. She had prayed every day for her death to arrive. She wanted to escape from the flames of that day, covering her face when she closed her eyes, and from the flames of hatred surrounding her when she opened them. She wanted to die as soon as possible until the day she met Hegel. Hegel was an old swordsman and a former wandering knight who had worked at the orphanage for years. Normally, she wouldn't have dared to say a word to the stern-looking man, but she took her first step towards living. She found Hegel's swordsmanship mesmerizing and asked how she could become like him. She wanted to learn swordsmanship from Hegel. However, Hegel said it wouldn't be much help to her in her life, especially for a girl like her. A blade like that would only end up hurting her. Hegel found her naive and asked her to go back. Meli firmly said that if she could learn that, she wouldn't be afraid of any fire in the world. Hegel was taken aback by her stubbornness and decided to help her. Looking back, his swordsmanship was rough and crude, but it was beautiful enough to make her forget. Even if it was only for a moment, she had forgotten the hell that was filled in her mind. Hegel took Meli to his training room and asked her choose any weapon of her choice. She found many familiar weapons, like swords and spears, amongst them. He said that he would teach her if she could swing any of it. Meli pondered over which weapon to pick and asked him if she really had to swing one. Hegel was uptight and assured he would teach only if she swung any weapon. Leslie picked up a needle and pointed it at Hegel's neck. She said as long as she could stand and fight, she would do anything for it. That was her first thrust. Her will to live was back after her first thrust. Meanwhile, back in the manor, Arsahan, done with those bandits' antics, stepped forward to slit his opponent's lung. It was his first thrust as well. The bandit he just thrusted had just died. The other bandits were on alert and couldn't believe that he had taken the life of their friend. They were shocked and asked if he was joking. Asrahan was in no mood to converse, so he asked them to shut their mouths and fight him head-on. Liam, Arsahan's master, took pride in him. Over the past month, he had taught Asrahan, his young descendant, only one thing, and that is stamina training. He taught him a stamina training method so that he would not get tired even after running for several hours. Even though Asrahan begged him to teach swordsmanship, Liam didn't teach him at all. All he did was to train his stamina. Yet the fact that a thrust like that was possible is because he had digested the needle properly. Liam asked Arsahan to show his young descendant his first step as a caravan. Asrahan had exceptionally thrust the lungs of a bandit. He had no skills or any experience with swords before, yet he had performed a precise thrust, which could have been done by digging precisely between the ribs. He had no doubt that it was possible only because of the needle he devoured a month back. He devoured his second sword, which was actually Meli's needle. Meli's memories lingered with him. After the day Hegel agreed to teach Meli, he taught her many things. They mostly trained in the forest away from the crowd. He taught her the basics of how to stand properly and grip a sword. He trained her to fight and helped her to survive. It wasn't easy for Meli to train every day. However, she was desperate to survive. Though it wasn't a systematically established theory, Hegel's swordsmanship contained the romance and freedom ingrained from wandering as a knight-errant. He held a strength that was unspeakably beautiful to one young girl who feared fire. Meli had Hegel as her role model, and she truly loved Hegel's sword. Days went by so fast. They trained every day and had grown closer to each other. Several years later, Hegel died of old age. His last words to Meli were that if someday she had to leave this place, he pleaded with her to go to the wide world. Those were his final teachings to her. He was glad that she was at the end of his journey. Meli was devastated when Hegel died. She mourned his death, and also thanked him for everything. He gave her the will to survive, and she wanted to do anything to survive. He wished for him to rest in peace and bid him goodbye. After Hegel's death, she followed his final teaching. She left the orphanage and went out into the open world. It wasn't easy for her to live in a different place, as she had spent half her life in an orphanage. Still, she wanted to fulfill Hegel's wish and became a mercenary. She traveled to many places and explored various things, and not long before, she made a name for herself as a fairly renowned mercenary. They called her the Sewing Gypsy. She wasn't sure whether they called her that because she used an unusual, needle-thin sword or because she was a young woman, rare in that line of work. She possessed an unusual aura around her. When Asrahan gave his first thrust, Meli's memories flowed back to his mind and spoke to him. He could feel her energy through the sword. It must be the digestion his master had spoken of. The bandit could sense something had changed within him and begged him to spare his life. However, Asrahan didn't consider his pleading and poked his sword on his neck, finishing it decisively. It was his first kill, yet for his first time, he didn't feel a thing. He felt no emotion rise within him. He simply saw the situation before him. That bandits clearly underestimated him, which allowed him to exploit an opening. However, being outnumbered, he couldn't expect the same luck as before. There were 3 of them, and they would know that as well. But he couldn't understand why the other bandits didn't try to attack him. They clearly had the numerical advantage, and would be dumb if they let go of the chance. Liam clearly knew what was going on and couldn't help but chuckle. He said that they were terrified of Asrahan. The movement Asrahan just showed wasn't something that could be from a beginner. He also added moderate fear aids survival, but excessive fear clouds objectivity. It inflates the enemy before your eyes beyond their actual size and makes you mistake them for a far mightier being. Liam said that in those bandits' eyes, he was probably a murderous fiend skilled with the sword. At that moment, Asrahan looked sharp with his murderous eye, carrying his sword, glaring at the bandits. It was also when he realized that Liam was visible only to his eyes and not to the rest of the world. Asrahan remembered. In the memories of Meli, Hegel said that since Meli was a woman who was born without any strength or stamina, time would never be on her side. It's one of the reasons why she should pierce her enemy through on the first or at most the second attack. He guided her not to compensate for what she lacked, but to make what she had shine. Meli's biggest strength was her natural flexibility. She had a body like a dancer's than a warrior and flowed freely like water. So from any angle and from any position, she can aim for the enemy's throat. Asrahan had a similar build to Meli. He might not be skilled, but he had the stamina to make a run for it. He tried to apply Hegel's teaching to deal with those bandits. Asrahan wrapped his head around the situation and tried charging at them in a sprint of a second. The bandits warned him not to get closer, or else they would have him killed. Despite the warnings, Asura charged at his enemies and aimed for their vital parts. The first bandit aimed his sword. However, Asura was quick enough to reach to his side and cut off his hand. He stepped on him and leapt forward to charge towards the second one. He pierced his sword through his head, splitting his head in half. Only one of the bandits remained. He thought Asura was way more cruel and called him a murderer. Asura glared at the remaining bandit with his murderous gaze. Asura left the manor carrying the living bandit with him. The night was extremely dark, and only the light from the moon helped him move around. He dug a pit and buried the bandit alive despite his begging. He filled the pit with sand, and he could see the ants crawling in the eyes of the bandit. He screamed out in pain when it pricked him, but he couldn't care less for those bandits. Liam asked whether he could set aside his doubts. He added that Asura had the stamina to swing a sword all day without losing his breath. He could easily handle 4 untrained thugs amidst a fight for his life. Asura realized what his master said was true. His power manifested in the midst of a life-or-death struggle as a caravan. During the fight, his body became as flexible as a dancer's, as if responding to the memories in the sword to Meli's memories, which grew vivid when the fight began. He could also understand a little about what kind of heart she fought the world with. He wondered if this was what his master meant about the power of digestion. The more he understood about his opponent, the stronger he became. Asura was thinking over and over again about any other possibility. His master called upon him, stopping him from his thoughts. Liam said he would never lie when it comes to swords. He also guaranteed that Asura's days would be filled with nothing but pain. He would face an endless succession of hardships where he would prefer death over life, so much so that today's ordeal will seem like happiness. Liam questioned if Asura was still willing to walk this path. Asura was nervous, even though he didn't seem to show it. Yet he steeled his heart and replied with a sense of reverence. He was willing to move forward, no matter what the path held, so that he could put his sword to Carlos's throat. Liam felt happy that his successor was keen to take revenge and sad at the same time over the loss of his family. The next day, Liam took Asura with him to train in the mountain range in the early morning. He asked Asura to climb the huge mountain with his bare hands and without any assistance. Asura managed to climb half the mountain, but he ran out of breath. He knew he could slip if he made a wrong move and lose his life after falling from a great height, so he didn't dare to look below. He was losing his energy, and the heat made it worse. He inquired with his master if this path truly was the right direction. Liam teased him, asking where his resolve from the last night had gone. Asura was breathing heavily and didn't answer his question. Liam said it was one of Asura's strengths, and he has always been the same way since his childhood. Asura was surprised that Liam had been watching over him from his birth. Liam said that he would address that at some point, but at first, he wanted to ask Asura a question. He questioned if he knew what stage he was in, on the path of the swordsman. The path of the swordsman is divided into 5 major stages. The first stage is the sword beginner, which is the entrance to the sword. Among them, those with talent reach the second stage. The second stage is the realm of the sword walker. The third stage is sword runner, who establish themselves as strong and served as pillars on the battlefield. The fourth stage is the sword expert, including heroes who overturned the tide of the battle single-handedly. The fifth and final stage is the realm of the heart sword, Swordmaster. They reign above all these swordsmen and are worshipped as gods. Asura said to Liam that he might have expected a spirited answer, but he knew his level well. The prerequisite for a swordmaster was to handle mana. The storage and the second heart were needed to handle mana, which formed a mana heart. Since Asura hadn't formed a mana heart, he knew he didn't even qualify as a beginner. He was still struggling to climb the mountain while Liam was amused by his answer. Liam thought Asura was quite objective about himself and said he was right in thinking that he was not even at the entrance to the sword. Yet this training, called greenhorn among greenhorns, would lead him to the beginner's path. This training would create his own mana heart. Asura found it unbelievable and demotivating. He found it wasn't worth risking his life just to form a mana heart. He could have actually died in a place like this. He was holding onto the rocks for the sake of his life. He said he didn't know how it used to be in his master's time, but nowadays anyone could drink an alchemist's potion, or have a walker-class knight infuse mana to awaken one's senses and form a mana heart. Even noble ladies who only learned self-defense swordsmanship could easily form mana hearts. He questioned why his master insisted on this method and ignored such easy paths. He could not understand what his master was trying to do. Liam agreed with him and said forming a mana heart was not difficult, and following those conventional methods would work too. However, he added that the blood of the caravan carries the power of steel, and to unleash that mighty power, Asrahan would need a strong vessel. Asrahan didn't quite expect that and was shocked at his master's level of thinking. Liam further added that an ordinary person's vessel wouldn't do much. A human heart can merely reach the human realm. However, if he wanted to reach the path of the Swordmaster, he would need a heart of steel. The heart of steel would not get scratched even if it clashed with the world, and there was only one way to forge it. When a person endlessly pushes himself to the brink of death, his own body would demand a mana heart. Even amongst the Liam's descendants, only a few completed their training to the end. It was a painful and terrible process. However, those people who endured all the training to the end would become the Swordmaster. Liam asked if Asrahan was motivated enough to become one of those Swordmasters. Liam was struggling to reach the top and thought of giving up, yet his master motivated him enough to climb the rough mountain. Liam assured that he would never lie about swords, and the mana heart he created would be different from anyone else in this world. Asrahan found a new ray of hope and reached for the top. In the eastern village of Campbell, situated in the Verdi region, there was a well-known pub. The pub was crowded, and the people at a specific table addressed the rumors regarding the caravans. One of the people at the table with golden hair asked if others had heard about the village called Caravans in the West. The other person replied that no one could find a single person for the past year, and asked why he was talking about that creepy place. The golden-haired person said there was something going on in those western villages. The rest of the people inquired what was wrong with it. He replied that he didn't know much about it, but warned them that it was clearly a dangerous place, as every thug who set foot in there had disappeared into the air. There were other rumors about how the monster wave the Northern Guardians mist had swept through the entire village, or a dark mage who conducted experiments was stationed there. All sorts of stories were floating around, causing restlessness among the people, but everyone reached the same conclusion, which was not to enter the western village if they didn't want to die. A customer who had a green cloak on him was listening to the conversation at his next table. He placed his glass down and wiped off those wine stains from his lips. He found it quite amusing that people had died just by stepping into a village. He thought that place would do nicely for whatever reason. Asrahan was motivated enough by his master. He trained greenhorns among greenhorns since that day to create his own mana heart. Though it wasn't easy, he started hanging from the cliff using only his left hand. He broke out of his fear of falling down. Even on those days when his whole body was drained, he didn't skip his training. Even if he had to deal with the intruders in the mansion, or on days when his muscle pains were so bad from all that training, or even lifting his arm was hard, he did not skip a single day of his training. He gave everything he had. He tried again and again to reach the top of the mountain. 1 month passed, just like that. However, even those insane trainings did not create his mana heart. He was frustrated and felt helpless. However, all his efforts were not in vain as his changes were undeniable. For one, his senses had become incredibly sharp. Not only were his sight and hearing increased, but the rest of his other senses had also improved. Also, his judgment and focus in dealing with situations had become incomparably better. For instance, when he had to deal with an intruder who entered the manor unannounced, he charged his dual-ended flail at Asrahan. However, Asrahan's senses were heightened due to the vigorous training. He could see the fast-moving weighted ball swinging towards him and dodged the attack. The intruder became furious and unleashed his chain with such force to slash him. Asrahan dodged those attacks and charged at him with great speed. The intruder tried stabbing him with the sickle blade and aimed for his eyes. Asrahan predicted his moves and crouched to counter his enemy's attack. When the intruder was thrown off balance, he thrust his needles into his enemy's knees. Blood splattered from the intruder's injured knees. Before he could process what was going on, Asrahan slashed him in his stomach, causing him to die. Asrahan knew his concentration had risen to a different level, and his changes were invaluable in the combat. Even though he had not reached the first stage of the path of swordsmanship yet, something had changed in him. His current self was different from his former one, and there could be only one reason for the change between them. He felt a strange sensation. As he breathed in, he felt as though something else had entered his nose along with the air. It was strange and unpleasant, just like how he felt when water had rushed into his nose. When he inhaled again, his insides felt filled, and by this time, it wasn't unpleasant. He could not grasp the situation, but Liam informed him that Azrahan had formed his mana. Azrahan thought to himself that he was not even at the stage of a sword beginner, as he had not formed his mana heart. Yet he had come this far with the help of Melia's needle power. He was disappointed, yet he knew how much he had progressed. He also realized how great his master was, and couldn't help but compare himself to Liam. Azrahan asked Liam what kind of power he'd be gaining when he had reached the next realm. Liam said to him not be impressed just with it, as he was still far from shedding his greenhorn skin. He also added that once Azrahan had formed his mana heart and progressed to a sword beginner who understands the depth of that power, only then could he stand on equal grounds with the needle's former owner. Liam instructed him that if he took another step beyond, by drawing out paths from his mana heart, he would reach a superhuman realm where he could enhance his body and shape offense and defense, and it was the realm of the superhuman. The world calls that realm of the superham a Swordwalker. Liam further added that it may be the very next stage after beginner, but once Azrahan faces it, he will understand how vast the difference is. Liam asked if his explanation answered Azrahan's question. Azrahan said yes, and would like to ask him another question. He asked if the man who entered the territory was a Swordwalker. Not long ago, Azrahan spotted a stranger walking into the village. He might be a neighbor, but he hoped the stranger wouldn't turn out to be an intruder. Liam said that the stranger was indeed a Swordwalker, and he was on a completely different level from the intruders he had faced so far. He further asked what Azrahan could even do in his current state, as he wouldn't last even a second. Azrahan calmly replied that for now, he would keep watching the situation and prepare for the worst. He did not have any options apart from it. Liam said that Azrahan could always abandon this land and avoid these hopeless battles. Azrahan replied that fleeing was never a choice for him, and after dealing with so many intruders, he had realized something. Even though the land has been ruined so badly that it's barely recognizable, he could not abandon this land. The village was filled with memories. His family, his villagers, the quiet mansion. Even though his loved ones were gone, the place remained with him. It's the only place that holds his memories of everyone. After a moment's silence, Liam asked his young descendant to grow stronger. He further added that in this Iron Kingdom, only the strongest had to stay, and even Azrahan's most natural wish for now was nothing but greed and luxury. So he asked Azrahan to keep repeating and chewing on those feelings he felt now and to turn them into the fuel to obtain his desire. He further added to use those trials as nourishment to harden himself like steel, so that no one would dare to laugh at his words. Azrahan was fueled by his master's words of wisdom. He thought that to protect his loved one, he had to grow stronger. Perhaps his master's words were still echoing in his head, because an unexpected trial arrived sooner than he expected. Not long before, a mysterious man had set foot in the territory. Watching him became part of Azrahan's daily routine. Observing the mysterious guest, who was a swordwalker, to judge whether he might become a neighbor, or whether he should classify him as a dangerous intruder, was his talk apart from his daily routine. Through his observation, he had learned a few things regarding the stranger. Though the village was full of vacant houses, he seemed to regard them all as owned by someone. He did not even touch a small trinket. He never tried entering the village's empty homes, and never opened creaking doors or touched the abandoned crops or vegetables. He lived only off the belongings he had brought. His manner exuded dignity. Another trait of his was that he would gaze at the sunset, sitting by the shore every evening lost in his thoughts. Sometimes, Azrahan found him spending his time in prayer. After days of tedious observation, Azrahan reached the conclusion that the stranger didn't seem dangerous, and he appeared to be a knight. Liam agreed with him, and added that he might be a swordsman who had achieved the swordwalker status. He followed the rules and etiquette strictly, even when no one was watching him. Such a rigid type of person was rare outside of knights. Azrahan said that he won't be a bad person to be his first neighbor, as knights upheld their honor and pursued justice. He thought that the stranger would be much better than those uninvited guests. Liam was pondering for a long time, and said that while knights sure did pursue honor, calling them righteous would be a stretch. Honor was inherently subjective. Those honor the knights chased and followed don't necessarily do good to everyone. A knight's honor was determined by the one to whom they had sworn their loyalty. By the will of their employer, they served those who provided them with valuable wealth. Liam said that he would redefine what knights had meant to Azrahan. He said the knights were simply swordsmen who used honor as justification for violence. They were simply the executioners who committed efficient murder based on long-inherited swordsmanship. They are just enemies who are annoyingly harder to kill because they are decked out in expensive equipment. Liam looked straight in the eyes of Asura. He warned him not to be blinded by the hollow ring of the word called knight. He asked him to observe carefully and judge the essence of the subject itself. He asked Asura to see the human in them and what he did best, and never to be certain of someone. Liam complimented that Asura's greatest trait was suspicion. It was one of his precious specialities. Asura was confused and was at a loss for words. Liam said that he had been watching Asura grow up and he had been like that since childhood. Liam explained what he had learnt about him. While Asura was listening to his father's legends of the caravan, he did not trust his father. He had endlessly probed the truth of those stories. Asura was embarrassed. Liam further added that even in the situations where he could have endangered himself, drunk on a newfound power, he found answers by eliminating various variables through pathological sensitivity and observations. Suspicion was not a complex theory. It simply meant not being swayed by what we see and hear but using every means and method and endless thought to approach the truth. If a person has no suspicion, he cannot surpass his limits. Liam suggested Asura not to lose that attitude, and said it was his talent for the sword. Asura was overwhelmed by his master's understanding of him. He was quite shocked but replied that he had understood and would remember it. After receiving such a profound lesson, Asura never let his guard down around that strange man. So he continued watching the guest. After taking sufficient time to confirm that the stranger wouldn't turn into an uninvited guest, he slowly approached him. He intended to invite him to be his neighbor. After all, though this estate was empty, he had no right to drive him out. If the stranger wished to settle, he would gladly help. However, he had never imagined that the stranger would draw his sword the moment he approached him. That stranger pointed his sword at Asura and warned him not to run, and if he showed his back, he wouldn't hesitate to kill him. The stranger had a strange aura surrounding him. Asura had spoken from a fair distance, wary that he might suddenly turn into a killer. But what he had thought was safe was not safe at all. Asura could tell that, if the stranger wished, his head would already be severed. He did not expect this even in the slightest. Mili's memories flooded into Asura's mind. Mili's alias, the sewing gypsy, was well known in the world. Thanks to her alias, she received recruitment offers from fairly renowned mercenary groups. Some notable guilds even approached her first, asking if she would consider joining their ranks. On the other hand, thugs who had heard rumors about her started picking fights with her more and more often. Her days as a mercenary became a routine. After growing accustomed to mercenary life, she took pride in her skill. Not because she was a woman mercenary wielding an unusual sword, but because she thought perhaps foolishly that she had become a swordswoman of real worth. But that was nothing but a naive delusion. The world was wider than what she had known. There were far too many monsters, and she first realized that because of one man. A knight of Red Falcon asked whether they called her the sewing gypsy, and told her that she was indeed most fitted for the name, for that feeble blade, mocking her. During her mercenary years, her swordsmanship had grown. She had long since surpassed her master, Hegel, and with that came arrogance. But the knight in front of her mocked her for her fighting skills. He warned her not to mistake herself as a skilled fighter, and said she was nothing but a worthless mercenary. He clutched her red hair, pulling her from the ground, calling her fire-scarred wench. He warned her that if she had not been a woman, she would have been dead already, and said she was no different from vermin. The only reason he had left her alive was entirely thanks to the Red Falcon Knights' code. The Red Falcon Knights never took the lives of women and children. He asked her to live the rest of her life feeling grateful for their chivalry. That was the day Meli felt an insurmountable wall between the knights and mercenary. That knight was like a tool forged of steel. At the very least, every knight she had faced in her mercenary life had been a monster. Monsters who seemed to live in another world entirely. She couldn't help but feel ashamed of being defeated. Later, she had learnt that the realm he had reached was called the Swordwalker. Asura had a killing intent so strong that it would nearly blow his mind. And like lightning, the memories of the Meli surged forth, the ones carved into the sword he had consumed. Just from her memory, he knew that Meli had been far more seasoned and skilled than he was now. Yet even she had fallen miserably to a true knight. In this moment, his heart thrashed violently. He thought it might burst. His breathing grew ragged, and his vision blurred. He heard a sharp ringing piercing his ears. The stranger knight approached him. Even Meli couldn't put up a fight against him. He thought that was why he could feel his heartbeat grow fiercer and felt his death coming. There, he saw it. The flickering blue energy that rippled around the strange man. Mana was spread outside his body in every direction like veins, adding his will to attack and defense. Some strands were like straight lines, and the others were like winding curves. Instinctively, he knew that was a sword walker's path, the superhuman realm possible only from the walker rank and above. The man drew his sword, a long sword, long and keen, a true two-hander. Unlike Asura, he stood steady, perfectly prepared to strike at any moment. His stance was built for thrusting a swift opening blow. The complete opposite of him, gripping his sword one-handed in a warped posture. The stranger asked Asura why he had been watching him. He said he had been observing him as well, and found him to be the rumored entity who had attacked the estate's visitors. He asked Asura to speak honestly. Asura forced his concentration higher, and began his suspicion. Asura answered that it was to distinguish whether the said stranger was a guest or an intruder. Even as he spoke, he did not relax his guard. He suspected every shift of his breath, every twitch of the toes visible beyond his boots, the angle of his shoulders and wrists, the slightest dart of his eyes with each passing second. The stranger said that it was harder for him to understand and asked him, "Explain further." The stranger observed his every movement sharply. Asura explained that he was originally born and raised in the estate as a resident. However, a year ago, while he was briefly away from the territory, his neighbors had disappeared, and the village had fallen into ruin. Whether it was a plague or a dark mage reached out with evil magic, he did not know the exact reason. Asura said that he wished to flee as well, but he couldn't abandon this village. Not long after, the barbarians and vagrants started invading, frequently threatening both this village and his life, so he had dealt with them all on his own. Asura didn't feel the need to tell him the whole truth. He further added that the stranger seemed far too strong, so he lingered at a distance, observing him. Asura said he did not appear to be one who would threaten his life, and that was why he approached him to confirm whether he was an intruder or a neighbor. Asura asked the stranger if he could understand him. He also added that if he were a guest, then he had intended to invite him as a neighbor. However, if he turned out to be an intruder, he needed to devise other means for the territory's sake. The stranger was amused and asked if he intended to face him, even knowing the gap in their skills. Asura remained firm and said that it was the land which held his life's memories, and it was way too precious of a place to simply abandon it and flee. The stranger was shocked at the young boy's answer. He shared his sentiments with him, and he felt sad for Asura. He spoke painfully that Asura had been through truly arduous times and said he could understand his situation. The stranger could understand why Asura was uptight and was on guard. Even now, Asura did not lower his sword. To ease him, the stranger said that it was his turn to state his position. He said that to become neighbors, they had to know each other's position, and asked him to stop being on guard and lower his sword. Asura said he would sheath his blade and tell his story. Asura still pointed that long, needle-like sword at him, radiating a sharp aura around him, which was too strong to dismiss. He remembered his master's lessons. There was only one way to forge a heart of steel, and that was by endlessly pushing oneself to the brink of death, until the body itself demands a mana heart. A silence passed before Asura answered. He said he was sorry and could not lower his sword. He said he could not fully trust the stranger, and he needed his sword for at least minimal defense. The stranger was shocked at the young boy's reply. He did not expect him to be suspicious of him. The stranger explained that if he truly intended to harm him, Asura would know that his sword would be meaningless. Whether Asura held the sword or not, it would make no difference. The stranger said that with both of them having drawn their weapons, sheathing first would go against his knight's honor, and he had intended to protect his honor. Asura said that he knew it as well, but he could not back down either. Hearing the boy's voice, the stranger erased his faint smile. Asura's eyes burned as fiercely as the sun. Asura said that he would not surrender to fear and give up. Even before the fight had started, Asura clearly remembered how bitter it was to give up before fighting. He was angered at his past self for not trying to fight against the Swordmaster Carlos, so he swore that he would never do it again. From those eyes, the stranger read flames. Flames with no logic or half-hearted killing intent could ever be extinguished. And inwardly, he marveled at what this young boy had endured, that he carried such fire in his gaze. The stranger's eyes sharpened as he studied Asura. Asura had a frail body and a face so delicate that one might mistake him for a girl. but he was not wholly untrained. The stranger could see the traces of harsh years of training all over his body. His muscles were sturdy from all that training. Even though his build was small, his balance was well maintained. Even his manner of speaking bore the dignity of nobility. The stranger wondered perhaps Asura was the son of a fallen noble family. It was common for such nobles to live hidden on the fringes. The stranger could see through him. He knew that Asura had not learned the sword through proper methods. He had an unorthodox form, and he poured all of his strength into a single opening strike swordplay, which was meant to overcome physical weakness. That might work with an untrained savage or, at best, if his opponent was at sword beginner level. The stranger's judgment was swift and sharp. He knew Asura had a beginner's framework, and even in the slightest did not pose a threat to him. He also knew that Asura knew those facts himself. Nonetheless, he challenged him to a duel. Asura's eyes were flaming with an unknown aura, and he looked firm in his stance. The stranger knew that a half-hearted response would not be sufficient. He had no wish to chatter with swords raised. He charged at Asura with all his might and tried to strike his wrist to disarm him. He did not wish to injure him, so he did what he thought would be best as a knight bound by honor. Asura had an unstable stance, and had gripped one-handed his slender blade, so he thought a mere touch from him would snap it in half. To a swordsman, the sword was more than a tool. Yet the stranger saw no other way. After making his decision, the stranger raised his longsword slowly. He drew in a faint breath, and his mana seeped into him, circulating through his paths. In the next moment, the stranger became a superhuman. The sparks flew around them. The sword he had swung sideways was deflected. He could not believe his eyes. Asura had deflected his sword with his long, thin needle, and he could not understand how a boy who had not even become a beginner had deflected it. And that was not all. Asura had a bizarre, almost acrobatic stance. Breathing deeply and with every breath he took, the blue aura circling him quivered and pulsed. Mana itself was flowing in waves from a mere sword beginner's breath. With just one breath, the surrounding mana rippled like waves. The stranger doubted his eyes and could not understand how it was formed inside the boy instantly. But he saw it clearly. A faint blue light left of the boy's chest. There was a heart. A heterogeneous mana heart, which marks the start of sword beginner. The stranger thought that even if Asura had become a sword beginner, deflecting his sword would be impossible. Yet he did so. He wondered if it was because of the mana heart Asura possessed, and his mana heart's form was strange. Normal mana hearts tend to be soft and flexible, but his mana heart was remarkably firm and solid like steel. The stranger wasn't sure of anything, but he knew one thing for certain. The boy's sword would become extraordinary as a lifelong strike, carrying everything he had. Asura knew that when he blocked his opponent's sword, it wasn't his skill, but merely luck. The stranger had no intention to harm him from the beginning, and he only aimed for his wrist, avoiding his vital points. The force on the sword was very minimal, and that's why it was possible for him to strike. Asura just predicted the incoming trajectory and thrust the needle's tip into that gap. That was how he blocked the strike, and the price he had to pay for that miracle was harsh. He felt a strong sensation when their swords clashed, and it felt like crashing into a speeding carriage with his bare body. He felt an intense pain, as if every bone in his body had shattered. Had he not clung to his consciousness, he would have dropped his sword instantly and collapsed on the spot. Such was the difference between his current self and the realm of a swordwalker. There was only one reason why he was still standing after clashing blades, and it was because he was a caravan. Asura had finally awakened his mana heart, his heart of steel, which he desperately longed for. However, he was just a beginner, and his thrust wouldn't reach him. Asura looked into the stranger's eyes, and he could read many emotions in him. Shock, agitation, suspicion of this situation, and confusion. As soon as he read those emotions, Meli's memories returned to him. Meli had crumbled over her overwhelming wall towards the swordwalker. After facing an insurmountable limit head-on, she was reminded of Hegel's teachings. Hegel told her never to forget about the very same thing. Most swordsmen consider a wall an insurmountable limit when they face it. However, that's all just an excuse from those who had chosen comfort, lacking even the courage to confront it. He said that the walls existed for the people to overcome. Fear is another blade a swordsman possesses, and it was nothing more than a stepping stone to climb higher. Hegel asked her not to turn away from fears, but rather stand and face them directly. He further added that she would certainly be cut and torn many times again and again in the same place miserably, and collapse helplessly to her knees. But if she kept clashing without giving up, her sword would surpass that wall for sure. So he asked her to believe in herself, and that was all there was to it. Meli's memories were haunting, yet beautiful. Every time Azrahan recalled Meli's memory, it tugged his heart. He knew what to do, and there was only one method. Azrahan had to create a path using both the heart of steel and the needle's owner. Did Azrahan end up paving his own path? If a person had lived a fierce life, or ever held a sword in his hand, he would eventually face the pressure seeping deep beneath his skin. He would feel the crushing sense of hopelessness, making even a single step feel like a burden. He will face a massive wall blocking his path. He would want to turn his back on the wall before him and run away. Even after knowing how dangerous his opponent is, Azrahan intended to clash against it. The stranger was amazed by Azrahan's attitude. Resistance is nothing but a youthful recklessness. However, that's a trial that Azrahan must absolutely go through. The path he goes through would not be perfect. It was enough to go through as long as there was a possibility of reaching it, even if it was clumsy and incomplete. As he inhaled and exhaled to the limit, he wrung out all his focus. He remembered his master's teaching, so he began to doubt. The world slowed down, and his senses sharpened to their extremes. He scanned all the information he could possibly perceive. His target was only the stranger, so he kept a close observation of him. Azrahan noticed which muscles the knight had tensed, how he breathed, what movements he prepared, where his eyes looked, how much oxygen and mana he inhaled, how much force he would invest in his next move, and how much mana he would release. As his suspicion began, he doubted every trivial element, dug into it, and questioned it. He examined everything without letting anything pass without a reason. He gathered around every clue and eliminated what was unnecessary to create his single path. Liam, who was observing Azrahan, smiled at how his descendant was a fast learner. He advanced without yielding before any adversity, and that's what it meant to be caravan. Azrahan reminisced about his master's lesson on the flow of the caravan's will. A caravan should not be afraid to clash and shatter. He should also be willing to throw himself wholeheartedly before the trial, forge himself, and display it before the world. Azrahan's heart pounded. The new heart that had been born inside him beat with immense force. If the pounding of a normal heart made it feel like one's chest would burst, then this other heart beat as if it would explode his entire body. With every surge, a shudder coursed through him. From the very moment it was formed, he knew it was a mana heart. Though this was a glorious moment after long training, he could not allow myself to rejoice. The guest before him had drawn his sword and swung it at him. That man was a knight, and he had more real combat experience than Azrahan did. His mastery of the sword was higher than his, and he had barely deflected the first strike by sheer luck. As Azrahan's understanding of his opponent grew, he could unlock a few of Meli's memories. Meli was scared of her circumstances of being the sole survivor amidst the blazing flames. She lost both her parents and the entire house to the fire. The fact that the tragedy that took everything from her was merely a beginning. The fire left a huge scar on her heart and her face. At times, she couldn't even face a mirror, and her days felt burdensome, as if breathing itself was a struggle. But it was also when she had realized that what she had truly feared was not fire but her own weakness of constantly running away. If someone had asked if she pierced through it, she only had one answer. She was no longer afraid of the world nor the world. She decided to face her fear, even if she collapsed or failed, so she decided to thrust her needle no matter what. At the end of perfect focus came perfect immersion. In that instant, Azrahan's hand and arm gripping the needle transformed, becoming those of the swordswoman Mary from the past. The line was hazy like a mirage. There were many such lines, but the more he focused, the more the outer lines disappeared, until only one line remained. The last line left was startlingly clear. The needle in my hand moved on its own, sucked into the line before me. The trajectory of the blade twisted on its own. The weapon had forged just like he did. A mere steel that should have been lifeless moved with will, as if alive. The stranger's eyes widened in that instant. He was agitated, shocked, and it uneased him. Regardless, Azrahan's needle ran towards him fiercely, and his sword pressed on, like an arrow. The swift, precise needle aimed to skewer his enemy. However, the stranger had deflected his needle hard, so that it flew far away from his sight. The needle spun with a greater force in the sky before it fell down, crashing into the ground. Our shonen once again saw memories of Meli pass before him. Meli was standing in the middle of a forest on a dark night, looking at the shining moon in the sky. She was asking Hegel if it was peaceful in heaven. After Hegel's death, she left the orphanage following his advice. She came out to the real, wide world. She met good people and met the sword. She lived a freer, broader life than what had originally been destined for her. The teachings that Hegel passed down, and holding the single needle that he had placed in her hand, she had realized that she became free just like her master. She yearned for a life of wandering. Yet she was not sure if she could truly say that she lived such a life. The world was swarming with monsters stronger than her. There were many high walls that could never be overcome by will alone. But she could tell Hegel that until the very last moment of her life, she never turned away from a single wall in her path. According to Surgeon's doctrine, she would meet with Hegel once again in the embrace of the flames. When that time comes, she promised to tell Hegel her story, just like he did. She desperately wished to meet him. Perhaps that's why she had hallucinated him at the end of the forest. She ran towards him, telling him that her story would probably begin with the fact that she was not afraid of fire anymore. When she reached the other end of the forest, she hugged him and cried in his embrace. It was all a hallucination as the flames drew closer, and she ran towards the fire. Instead of retreating, she stepped forward like a moth to a flame. That was the end of Meli, the swordswoman. Meanwhile, Arsahan got an alert that his sword digestion was completed.